Okay, so Laura Thurlow's testimony is about to get a lot more interesting because Leon Jacob apparently then asked her how to hire a hitman. I'm here alongside Sanford Rubenstein. He's my guest for the afternoon. This is a crazy case out of Texas. What do you make of it here?
Well, it looks like the prosecution is laying a foundation here for the ultimate testimony of this hit.
How important is her testimony in that Leon Jacob called her about hiring this hitman?
Well, certainly it shows that he wanted to hire a hitman. And now they're probably going to bring in evidence later down the road of it actually happening, that the defendant in this case hires the hitman.
And actually earlier, if you've been following us here on the Law&Crime Network, we played some testimony from this hitman who really wasn't a hitman, but kind of was a shady character that somehow got involved in this case. You know, as we watch this case, how common is it for something like this to happen? It seems like we do hear about these hitman cases once in a while, but I mean, here you have a doctor that gets involved with this case because he basically doesn't want his ex-girlfriend testifying against him in an assault case, and ends up finding himself in much worse trouble.
Look, he's on trial for murder. That's serious, serious stuff. At the end of the day, we're going to see as this trial progresses, the prosecution lay out a case. And then ultimately a jury is going to have to decide if the evidence they've provided, beyond a reasonable doubt, demonstrate that he is guilty.
All right, so Sanford's going to stick by with us for a few more minutes, but I want to continue to play the testimony from this paralegal because she says some very interesting stuff. Let's take a listen.
Driving at the time?
BMW.
And what happened when you arrived over at the criminal courthouse?
We went to the clerk's office and looked it up, and there was no criminal history. Well, no criminal charges that had been filed recently.
And was he satisfied with that?
At that time, was he satisfied that, I guess.
Okay, let me rephrase it
Yeah.
a little bit. What was his response when he learned that no charges had been filed? How did he act?
We just kind of moved past that.
Where did you go?
We got into his car, and then he began to explain the story behind why he was concerned about why he may have criminal charges filed against him. And we drove to a hotel, the Holiday Inn, where his ex-girlfriend was working.
Did you know his ex-girlfriend?
No.
Where was the Holiday Inn located that he drove you to?
It was downtown. I don't know the streets, but I just know it was downtown. It was right before Super Bowl.
Can you describe for the jury how he was acting during that time period?
He was agitated, nervous. He was essentially trying to, he was a little bit desperate, wanting to get his girlfriend back. Apparently he and his girlfriend had some type of an argument. He had stated that.
Well, let me stop you there.
Okay.
You said he seemed agitated.
Mm.
Did he want you to do something for him when you got to the Holiday Inn?
Yes.
What did he want you to do?
He wanted me to try to speak to his girlfriend and see if I could get her to come back to him.
So, is it your understanding that that's the night that she actually left him?
The night.
The night of that they got into the fight?
Yes.
Was that the night that she actually left him?
That was my understanding.
Okay. Did he start talking to you about your background as a paralegal?
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
He questioned me as to what I used to do. He said, I know that you used to do criminal defense. And I explained to him that I did. And he said, well, I bet you know a bunch of people a bunch of people that have done a bunch of things. And And I said, oh, sure. And we went into some of the cases that I had handled. And he said, do you know people in the cartel? Do you know people that, do this and that? And I said, yeah. And we were talking about that.
So he asked you if you knew people in the car?
All right, folks, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm your host this afternoon, Rachel Stockman, and you were just listening to some fascinating testimony that's about to get even more fascinating in the Leon Jacob murder for hire trial. That was Laura Thurlow. She's a paralegal that had a lot of contact with Leon Jacob, and she walks us through what happened leading up to him actually asking her to help him hire a hitman. I'm here alongside Sanford Rubenstein.
Let me correct myself.
Please.
I said earlier that this is a murder trial. It's not. It's an attempted murder trial. The actual crime is solicitation of capital murder. The murder never took place.
So as you see it now, as we watch this trial unfold, how do you see this coming out?
Well, it turns out that the witness, the main witness here, the undercover police officer, very well will testify. And I think one of the defenses may be entrapment, that he was entrapped to hire this undercover cop to murder. So we'll see how it plays out, but I would expect an entrapment defense here.
Yeah, and he also says that, listen, I knew I was hiring this guy, but I didn't really want my ex-girlfriend dead. I was just trying to get her kidnapped and try to convince her to drop these charges she had filed against me, including stalking and some other charges.
Well, let's see if he tries to sell that to the jury and actually takes the stand and
He does,
tells that
Sanford,
tale.
he does.
He does.
And let me tell you, it is fascinating testimony. We're going to get to some of that testimony later. There's another case that we're following here on the Law and Crime Network that I think everyone's going to be very interested in. It is actually our first civil case that we've ever streamed live from gavel to gavel. And this is the case of Gavin Cox versus MGM Grand and David Copperfield. Yes, that David Copperfield who performs magic tricks in front of an audience in Las Vegas. This man that's suing claims he was injured in 2013 during one of these magic tricks. Let's listen to a quick review of this case that's about to start. It's actually in jury selection right now.
World-famous illusionist David Copperfield might be forced to break the cardinal rule of magic and reveal the secrets of his illusions in open court. Copperfield is being sued in Las Vegas civil court by 57-year-old Gavin Cox, who claims he was injured during a 2013 Copperfield show in Las Vegas. The British tourist who once cooked for British royalty claims he fell and struck his head on the ground after tripping over construction debris as one of Copperfield's assistants whisked him and other audience members through a dark secret passageway during the disappearing stunt. Cox claims he suffered brain trauma and is forced to wear an oxygen lung at night because he stops breathing when he's asleep. He's seeking punitive damages from Copperfield and MGM for alleged negligence. The illusionist and hotel strongly deny all claims, stating Cox's injuries were pre-existing and or unrelated medical conditions. This is Aaron Keller for the Law and Crime Network.
Okay, so this could be a really interesting case, and we could actually end up seeing some of these magic tricks that he has revealed. I'm here with Sanford. Tell me, because you do these trip and fall accident cases, you took a look at the complaint that the plaintiffs filed, Mr. Gavin Cox, who was injured. What do you make of this case?
Well, first of all, let's see if David Copperfield can use his magic to get out of this lawsuit and have a defendant's verdict.
So far, his magic hasn't worked because it's in trial. It's in jury selection right now.
Well, this also is a matter where juries are going to decide the case based on facts, not illusions. And here we have one of his staff escorting a member of the audience who was asked to participate and agreed to participate in a David Copperfield illusion trick, who trips and falls because there was debris on a walkway. Now, this victim was being led through that walkway by an assistant of David Copperfield.
And I mean, when you're at one of these performances, you don't really seem to have that much choice, kind of when you get picked. I mean, I guess you can tell them no, but if you're picked as an audience member to come into one of these magic tricks, it seems like you feel pressure to go.
But I think the real issue here is, was it a dangerous condition on that ramp which caused this audience member to fall?
And it looks like there was construction going on, and they were saying, the plaintiff saying that they're being negligent here, that the construction company, MGM, David Copperfield, were being negligent because they didn't warn.
Also, they're claiming there was debris.
Right.
Now, if you're going to lead an audience member through a ramp, there shouldn't be debris on the ramp. That certainly is a serious issue for the jury to consider as they decide liability in this case, or fault.
So do you think that it's a pretty good case based on what we know in the complaint? Of course, we never know how things pan out when it actually goes to trial.
Well, I think for actual damages, yes. But then the issue of punitive damages,
Yes.
Punitive damages are only given when something is so outrageous, so unconscionable, that it shocks the conscience of the jury. Does debris on a walkway shock the conscience of a jury?
Well, what about
I'm not so sure.
What about his injuries, though? The fact that he possibly suffered some really serious injuries
Well, there's two
here,
parts.
even brain damage.
There's two parts of a case. One part is liability or fault, and the other part is injuries and damages for those injuries. So first, before one considers damages, you have to get through the issue of liability and fault. Was David Copperfield, his staff, the MGM production people responsible for this injury, which would have been as a result of the negligence in not maintaining that walkway in a safe condition?
Well, it will certainly be very interesting. And one thing that I'm dying to know, based on the fact, apparently this audience member that's suing, Mr. Gavin Cox, was called up during this particular magic trick, Lucky Number 13, I think was the name of it. Do you think in the course of the trial there's a possibility that the magic behind this magic trick could be revealed?
It's possible. It's
Yeah.
certainly possible. So I think one of the things that David Copperfield has to be concerned with is, am I better off having that known by the public
Yeah.
or settling this case?
Well, that's what's so interesting about this, because usually these type of slip and fall cases, they don't go to trial very often, at least in my experience. So the fact that this is not only going to trial, but it has the possibility of revealing some of David Copperfield's tricks is kind of risky for him, don't you think?
Well, let's see how it plays out. Let's see if this case actually goes to verdict.
Well, we will certainly see. I'll tell you what, we have a crew in Las Vegas, Nevada right now. Jury selection is underway in that civil court. And openings in this case are expected to start in a couple of days, and we'll bring them to you live here on the Law&Crime Network. That will certainly be interesting. For our sake as trial watchers, I certainly hope it goes to trial because I want to see what unfolds here. We'll be keeping a very close eye on that. I want to turn back now to this fascinating testimony we've been watching in the Leon Jacob murder for hire plot. We were listening to a paralegal who was solicited by Leon Jacob to help with this plot that unfolded, and she played a really critical role in all of this. Let's take a listen to more of her testimony.
He wanted me to see if I could go and talk to Megan and try to help him get her back, is what he was wanting me to do. And if I couldn't help him to get her back with him, then he wanted me to ask her to please leave town. And it kind of progressed. It went from there to where if she wouldn't get back with him, wouldn't leave town, then could I either personally, grab her, put her in a car and take her to him, or have somebody do that. I could give you a syringe that you could use and you on her, bring her to me, and I'll take care of the rest.
So while you're at the bar and you're talking with him, about how much time has transpired from the time he showed up at your uncle's law office that day to the time that you're at the bar having this conversation?
2 to 3 hours, maybe. I'm gonna guess. Maybe a little bit more.
What made you not worried or concerned about you not being at your job and working?
I became very concerned, but by the time we got to the bar, that's when about 2 to 3 hours had passed, I guess would be best. So maybe a little bit more time had lapsed once we got to the bar. And at that point, I began to feel uncomfortable. And I would try to text on my telephone, I was wanting to text like somebody at my office or, you know, hey, call me so I can be called back to the office. But he was always looking over my shoulder, always looking over my shoulder. So I felt uncomfortable, and I felt uncomfortable in general based on the things that he was discussing and asking about and inquiring about concerning who I know now, you know, obviously is Megan. And so I said I need to use the ladies' room, and I got up and I walked over to the ladies' room. As when I got up to walk over to the ladies' room, he got up and followed me to the ladies' room and just stood outside the door and waited until I came out. So I didn't feel comfortable being around him at that point.
Did you ask?
Alrighty, this is some bizarre testimony from Laura Thurlow, a paralegal. She's testifying about her interactions with Leon Jacob, who is on trial right now in the case that we're showing you that's happened last week, for a soliciting to attempt to murder his ex-girlfriend. What do you make of this testimony here?
Well, first of all, when she said he asked her that he wanted someone to take care of her, obviously he didn't mean he needed a nurse.
That's what I don't understand about this. So he's trying to say, yeah, I didn't know that I was hiring a hitman to kill Megan, my ex-girlfriend. I thought maybe this guy would scare him. That's pretty damning testimony.
Well, I think even more damning down the road is going to be the testimony of the undercover police officer with regard to what exactly was said to him by this defendant with regard to this plot to murder.
Why did this case go to trial?
Well, obviously, the defendant didn't want to take whatever deal was offered, if a deal was offered, and said, I'll roll the dice with a jury.
Well, I don't know. We'll see. I think that might end up being a pretty big mistake. Let's continue listening to more of this witness's testimony because it's so interesting. Let's take a listen.
You got to work.
I did.
And what was his response?
You're mine for the night.
And
I talked to your uncle, you're mine for the night.
did that concern you?
Yes.
How much longer did you all stay at the bar?
Not a whole lot longer after that. We got back in the car and drove back around the Holiday Inn where she worked again a few times. And then I told him that I lied and told him I had a family dinner that I needed to be at and that my family would be waiting for me and looking for me. And at that point, he finally went ahead and drove me home, and I had him drop me off several houses away from my parents.
During the course of the time that you're spending with him in the Mercedes and he's having you call people, does the conversation ever come back around to the various options that he's pursuing in regards to Megan?
Yes.
Talk to us about that.
Again, I think the more that he is in the vehicle with me or on the phone with me, the more we talk, the more it's, I've got to get Megan back. I've got to get Megan back. You know, I love her. I need Megan back in my life. I have to have her back in my life. And then it would go again, like I said, from that to if I can't have Megan back in my life, she needs to leave the state. She needs to be gone. She needs to go. And then he would eventually revert to, you got to know somebody that can, get her, put her in the vehicle. I can give them a syringe. They can use the syringe on her, bring her to me, and I'll take care of the rest.
Did you have the impression during this time that this was just a lovesick guy who was missing his girlfriend, or did you feel like it was more serious than that?
at the time, I thought he was an extremely lovesick guy that was very bound and determined to try to get his girlfriend back, but it was progressing to a much worse place.
A very lovesick guy or an attempted murderer? That is the question in this case. Wow, some really interesting testimony from this paralegal that the defendant, Leon Jacob, apparently recruited to do some really bizarre things, including taking her to the Holiday Inn where his ex-girlfriend, Megan, was working and kind of almost stalk her down. What do you make of this testimony?
You know, what we see here is where the cover-up, in this case, an attempt to hire to murder this ex-girlfriend, turns out to be a lot more serious than the underlying problem he had with the ex-girlfriend in terms of the criminal charges she was pressing against him for assault. So the cover-up is worse than the initial crime.
Absolutely. It seems like this guy is so fearful that Megan, his ex-girlfriend, who apparently he was still in love with, was going to file these assault and stalking charges, that he made the situation much, much worse for himself. But what do you make of this paralegal that we've been watching on the stand here that's kind of just going along with this guy? I mean, she not only went with him once, she goes with him again the second day.
I think the million-dollar question here is, why did he choose her?
Yes.
To ask her about finding a hitman? Why did he choose her to try to go to the hotel that this ex-girlfriend worked at to try to talk her into getting back with him? Why her?
And
that seems to be an unanswered question.
And did you hear what she said about the syringe?
Another
That was bizarre.
Very bizarre piece of testimony.
Because remember, he's a former doctor and he had access to medical supplies. And so he told this woman, according to her testimony, that he was going to take if they could just get her into a car, he would have a syringe and he'd take care of the rest. What does that mean?
Exactly.
If you're a juror.
By taking care of the rest, does that mean he was going to murder her? Or does that mean he was going to try her into not pressing the charges? We just don't know at this point.
Of course, his defense is, oh, no, I wasn't going to murder her. I just wanted to get her in the car. I just wanted to convince her. I really loved her. And to drop these charges.
Was he lovesick or very sick at the idea of going to jail?
Or is he just a very sick man?
Could be.
All right, let's continue to listen to more of this fascinating testimony from Laura Thurlow, a paralegal recruited by defendant Leon Jacob.
Okay, and what caused that change in you?
Well, just the fact that we're using the word syringe and kidnapping and bringing her to him to be taken care of, or finding someone to take care of her, brought me to that point.
At some point, did you get him to take you back to the Lyric Center that day?
Yes.
He's told you that he has options, A, B, and C. Why don't you pick up the phone, call the police, and say, you all need to know about this guy. I think he's going to kill his girlfriend. Why don't you do that?
I went back to my office, upset, frustrated that I had been placed in that position, and I approached my uncle, and I explained to him what I was being told, and his response was, "Oh, he's." Oh, okay, that's right. Okay.
But was your uncle good friends with the defendant's mother?
Yes.
And were they family friends?
Yes.
And so after talking with him, did you make the decision not to contact the police?
Yes.
When is the next time that you came into contact with the defendant?
Physically?
Yes.
The following day, I believe.
And does he come back to your office at that point?
Yes, he does.
And how is he acting on that day?
I'm in the back. I've kind of made it clear to my uncle and to my coworkers that I don't want to be disturbed, I guess, by Mr. Jacob. Because I've looked, there's no criminal history. I know what he's trying to do. I don't want to be a part of it. he begins walking up and down the halls of the law office and peering in the windows of the other office staff members' windows, other attorneys' windows, and
Did you contact security?
I did not at that time, but one of the attorneys in my office did. And may have been two attorneys in my office.
And based on their conversation, was the defendant allowed back in your office?
No, and they also instructed the security to, if they see him, to have him escorted off the grounds or have the police called.
So at that point, was your uncle on board with keeping the defendant out of the office?
Yes.
Did the defendant continue to try and make contact with you?
Yes.
Was it an obsessive type communication with you? In other words, did he continue to text you and call you?
Yes.
Did he show up at your work again?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
He would show up, I'd be outside on the side of the building smoking a cigarette, and he would just show up, or I may get a text message from him saying, I'm downstairs, come downstairs. Another time, I got a email that simply said, at Beer Paredes, and
Let me stop you there.
okay.
The email from an email address associated with the defendant?
Correct.
And where is Beer Paredes in relation to your office?
Across the street, directly across the street.
And did you send anyone over there or check on it to see if he actually was over at the Beer Paredes like you said he was?
Yes, I did. One of my coworkers, I asked her to go over there to see if he was there. At this point, I had already made changes to how I exit the building on a daily basis because I was concerned about his, I would call irrational behavior. But she went over there and she took a photograph of him sitting, watching both of the openings, I guess, the entrances to my building.
So your coworker went over to Beer Paredes and took a picture of him?
Yes.
Did you have security help you at all with the situation?
Yes. Well, that was in the early part of the day, early morning, mid-morning, when I had gotten the email. And then, so when it was time to leave, come to find out he was still there. And this is after 5 p.m. So I asked security to please escort me to our vehicle. And as we were being escorted out to the vehicle, he came out of the Beer Paredes. And he began to approach, and the security guard told him that if he came any closer, they were going to call the police, that he needed to leave. He went around the side of the building and just was kind of peering around the side of the building until the security guard again told him, I'm going to call the police if you don't leave.
So is he still trying to make contact with you? The defendant, is he still texting you?
Yes.
Still emailing you?
Still emailing, still calling incessantly, to the point where I changed my telephone number on 2 separate occasions.
And that didn't deter him?
No.
At some point, did you contact one of your friends named Kenneth?
Yes.
And without saying what was said, by Kenneth, did you talk to him about the problem that you were having with this defendant?
Yes.
And what did you ask Kenneth to do for you?
I just asked him if he could please talk to him and ask him to leave me alone.
Folks, this case just gets more and more bizarre as we listen to the testimony of the paralegal that was solicited by Leon Jacob, the defendant on trial in this murder for hire plot, as she describes what Leon Jacob did to her. Apparently, she says, he not only asked her to help him find a hitman to kill his ex-girlfriend, then you just heard her on the witness stand describing how Leon was kind of starting to stalk her and how she actually had to change her phone number 2 times. Now, I'm here with Sanford Rubenstein. One thing that I really want to hone in on here is the relationship. Like, how does this woman know Leon Jacob? And then she was starting to get at it a little bit that her uncle knows Leon Jacob, and she was stopped there.
Well, the other question is, how did she happen to come forward to police or prosecutors?
Yes.
Now, we've heard a lieutenant mentioned here, so maybe it was through the lieutenant who was a friend of hers that she told the story to, who then advised her that she has to come forward and give all the facts to prosecutors. But you're right. He's stalking her. He's harassing her.
He's stalking
and what is
her.
he doing with this stranger who he just calls to solicit to murder, now stalking her? It looks like insanity might have been another defense in this case, because
Seriously.
he sounds like a very insane person.
Well, she even said he was acting irrational. I mean, is it possible he was just so lovesick and he was so nervous that this, not only was he claims he was lovesick with this woman, Megan Barricas, his ex-girlfriend, but to me it sounds more like a man that's panicked that his professional career, now remember, he's a doctor, is going to get ruined if she comes forward with these assaults and stalking charges.
And we have to remember, lovesick is not a defense to murder, attempted murder.
It sure is not.
Or soliciting for murder. Not a defense.
But what is a defense? Entrapment? That's something that he could raise?
I think entrapment is probably the defense that's going to be raised here by defense counsel. Entrapment by the police, entrapment by this undercover officer. Apparently there's more testimony down the road about the ex-girlfriend being set up by the police in a situation in which she was tied and bound.
We actually have those pictures. If we can show our viewers, we'll get them pulled up there, where this was a really elaborate plot. There you see Sanford.
To make that appear to him that this idea that he had of having a hitman kidnap her and kill her was entrapment, that they entrapped him by showing him these photos. That seems to me where they're going to go in the defense in this case.
Okay, so let's talk again about this paralegal. One of the things she said during her testimony is that Leon Jacob said something to the effect of, "I'll take care of you for the night if you don't want to go home," or a comment like that. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, that's left to interpretation.
Yeah.
You're mine for the night? I believe
You're
that's
mine
what he
for the
said.
night. I'm sorry, yes.
You're mine for the night? What does that mean? In the hotel in which this ex-girlfriend works? Very strange behavior.
See, I have a theory that this guy is kind of like a big egomaniac that thinks, I mean, he's a decent looking guy that just thinks women are going to fall all over him, and maybe he was trying to somehow use his charm on this woman. Because, I mean, he did convince her for 2 days to go help him out with all these bizarre tasks related to the case. So the question is, was she fearful? Is that why she went with him? Or was she somehow convinced by him? You know, he made it attractive for her to go with him. I don't quite get it.
Well, I don't think at any point she was attracted to go with this scheme.
No.
And obviously, she is a damning witness in this case.
She certainly is. We're going to continue to play some more of this testimony, but before we do, I do want to let our viewers in a little secret. Of course, this case happened last week, and we're replaying it for you all because we thought it was so fascinating. We missed some of these key moments. If you're playing defense attorney in this case, do you let, and I'll tell you what happens, but do you let Leon Jacob take the stand in this case?
That's one of the most difficult decisions a defense lawyer has to do, and that is to advise the client whether they should or shouldn't take the stand. And of course, ultimately, it's the client that makes that decision, and sometimes it's not the right decision. There's a lot of material here that is for cross-examination, stuff that the prosecution can use. So I think there's a danger in him testifying. On the other hand, if he doesn't testify, even though the jury's charge don't take that into effect, we have a statute, a constitution, which doesn't permit self-incrimination, but they may say he didn't testify. Why?
Yeah, well, I'll let you in on a little secret. He does testify. It doesn't go over so well, especially during cross-examination. But I'm in agreement with you. I think it was not probably
And I would think, if your theory is right and he's an egomaniac, he insisted on testifying, even against his lawyer's advice.
Exactly.
Which happens.
Which happens, especially in a case like this. He maybe pushed it to go to trial, and he thought he could be so convincing to the jurors that, of course, they would believe him over all this evidence. But let's continue to listen to this paralegal finish out her testimony, her interactions with the defendant, Leanne Jacob.
And it's back to determine whether or not he had success in telling the defendant to leave you alone.
I didn't have to. I was, Kenneth had done odd jobs for me, and he had come to pick up some money for an odd job, and we were standing outside my office building when my phone rang, and it was Mr. Jacob. And I said, well, here he is calling. He says, give me the phone.
Okay, and let me stop
Right.
there. So without saying what was said, did Kenneth have a conversation with the defendant?
He did.
Did the defendant continue to contact you after that?
He did.
Judge, may I approach the witness? To show you what's been entered into evidence is State's Exhibit number 45, and I want.
Sorry about that freezing there of that witness. We're going to get back to her testimony very, very shortly. But I want to speak to you more, Sanford, about this case. We were talking a little bit about defendants and whether they testify. In general, what's your advice when someone hires you? I know you do a lot of civil cases. Maybe they have to testify?
Well, I may tell you that I've done it in my career criminal cases. Early in my
Yes.
career, I was trying criminal cases. So it's a very, very difficult decision for the lawyer to make in the case as to whether to advise your client to testify or not testify. It really depends on what the testimony has been in the state's case, in the prosecution's case, to see if you really need to have the defendant take the stand. It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the defendant may charm the jury and they believe what he says and he's acquitted. On the other hand, if he's attacked, if he's not good on cross-examination, he could blow the whole case. So it's a real slippery slope for a defense lawyer. But at some point, the defense lawyer is going to have to make a determination, usually after the prosecution has put in its case, if he needs that defendant to testify.
When you have a client like Leon Jacob, where, you know, clearly through some of the testimony that we're hearing, he really thought he was in control of the situation. It seems to me he's a guy that thought he was outsmarting what was going on. He thought he could find, you know, he thought he could actually devise this plot to kidnap his ex-girlfriend and somehow convince her not to file these charges against him. When you have a client like this, how do you attempt to convince them probably not the best idea to go on that witness stand?
One of the most difficult things for a defense lawyer is when you have a client who thinks they are smarter than you. Not only smarter intellectually, but smarter in strategy. When you hire a lawyer as a defendant, you have to trust their advice or don't hire them.
Right.
And if they tell you don't take the stand, then you got to bite your lip and not take the stand. Because I think, like I said earlier, in this case, it was a matter of ego. He thought he could talk the jury out of convicting him. Could have been a very big mistake.
It could be. Well, as I said, he does take the stand, and we will get to that a little bit later as we continue to watch this trial unfold. I want to go back to this paralegal's testimony. What do you make of that? Because, again, she's talking about not only Leon Jacob asking her to find a hitman, but this bizarre behavior she describes after the fact.
Well, I think the bizarre behavior is significant because it shows you that he's out of control. But I think also it very much will buttress the testimony of the undercover police officer to confront the possible defense of entrapment. Because the truth of the matter is, here she is totally uninvolved in this situation, and she's swearing under oath that he asked her to find someone to take care of her.
Why didn't she call the police, though, right away? I mean, if something like this is happening to me where this guy's dragging me along, stalking me, calling me at all times of night, hanging around my office, I call the police.
You know, I can play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
She spoke to her uncle. We don't know what her uncle said because that would have been hearsay and wouldn't have gotten into evidence anyway. She may not have wanted to get involved. She may very well have wanted to say, you know what, I want to forget about this whole thing and just not be involved in it. I know if I do go to the police, I could be a witness in a high-profile trial. I don't want that. That could have been her thoughts. But
Maybe
ultimately, she
knew-
did go to the police, or the police came to her because they knew from her conversations with this lieutenant friend of hers that this all happened.
Okay, we got to listen to more of her testimony. This is the paralegal who talked to Leon Jacob about this plot. Let's listen to her testimony.
Back to determine whether or not he'd had success in telling the defendant to leave you alone.
I didn't have to. I was, Kenneth had done odd jobs for me, and he had come to pick up some money for an odd job, and we were standing outside my office building when my phone rang, and it was Mr. Jacob. And I said, well, here he is calling. He says, give me the phone.
Okay, and let me stop
Right.
you there. So without saying what was said, did Kenneth have a conversation with the defendant?
He did.
Did the defendant continue to contact you after that?
He did.
Judge, may I approach the witness? To show you what's been entered into evidence is State's Exhibit number 45, and I want you to just take a look at it for a second. Read it to yourself if you would for me. Okay, so let me stop you. Is what's contained in State's Exhibit 45, would that be a fair just assessment of some of the types of text messages and contacts that the defendant was making with you during this time period?
Yes. Yes. Did I talk with?
The defendant.
Yes, I believe I did.
Okay, tell me about that.
Trying to recall everything. I apologize. He would still. Oh yes, he did call. He was upset trying to find Zach. Well, actually, he had contacted our law office and contacted my uncle and said that I had swindled him out of his money. And I had no clue what he was talking about at that point.
Did you take any money from the defendant?
No.
After that, did you have contact with the defendant?
No.
Judge, I pass.
All right, some very interesting testimony from the paralegal. Her name is Laura Thurlow, and she was basically solicited by Leon Jacob when he found out that his ex-girlfriend was going to file stalking and assault charges against him. And then she got kind of intertwined in this elaborate plot wherein prosecutors believe that Leon Jacob tried to hire a hitman that turned out to be an undercover officer to kill, or attempt to kill, because she never was killed, his ex-girlfriend. Wow, that's a mouthful. You wrote down some notes, Sanford Rubenstein, while we were listening to that. If you were the attorney there, the defense attorney, you had some objections.
Well, first of all, when she starts talking about her observations, it seems to me she's speculating. And if I was the defense lawyer, I would have stood up and said, objection,
Her
speculation.
observations about Leon.
Yes, that's speculation. So I don't know how proactive the defense lawyer is in cutting short the testimony of witnesses. But in this case, if it was me, I would have objected on the grounds of speculation, that she was speculating with regard to anyone else, because he never said anything to her about hiring anyone else. She was speculating. Shouldn't have been allowed in.
Interesting. What do you make of her credibility as a witness, whether she's believable, and what she's actually seeing in terms of going to the criminality or lack of criminality for Leon Jacob?
Well, she seems to be credible to me, and in terms of her importance as a witness, her importance here primarily is for the prosecution to show it's not entrapment, because not only will you have the testimony of the undercover police officer, but you also have testimony from an uninterested party who says he came to her first to solicit someone to do these killings. So I think it's an important piece of evidence in this case. She seems credible to me. I think the jury's going to believe her.
And again, it goes to the fact of this behavior, right? Because we're going to have next, if you stick with us, we're going to have Megan Barricas, his ex-girlfriend, who he tried allegedly to kill, take the stand. She's going to talk about some of this stalking behavior. But then you have this woman, Laura Thurlow, that really didn't know the defendant very well before this all happened, testifying to the fact that he also creeped her out. He also went to her office. He also called her incessantly.
You know, in summation, I may very well say he may have been a creep, but he wasn't someone who would hire someone to commit murder. Creepiness is not enough.
It sure sounds like that's what he was trying to do when he talked to this Laura Thurlow, the paralegal here.
I'm not saying he wasn't trying to do it. I'm saying that creepiness is not a defense.
That is true. That is true. Sanford, as always, thank you so much for joining us here on the Law and Crime Network. We love having your feedback and love having you watch these cases unfold. So please join us again.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to continue to watch the testimony. This is really important. This is the cross-examination of this paralegal. Let's take a listen.